Hello again. So, for this class, you are posting on two writers, Leo Tolstoy writing The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Franz Kafka writing The Metamorphosis. These are two completely different stories. They are paired together mostly because they are of a similar length and not really even the same time period, but within a few decades of one another. They are not obvious thematic connections between them, so I'm just letting you know that, so you're not looking for them. I'd like you to read both of them, though. You can write about both of them, or if you want to go into detail on one or the other, that's okay. Tolstoy, a Russian writer as well, possibly the most famous Russian writer. He wrote War and Peace and Anna Karenina. These are long, thick, dense Russian novels. But he also wrote some short stories, including this one, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And this is a very it's a very moving story, and I don't really want to give too much away. I think it's quite straightforward. It's about this character who we find out at the beginning from an outside perspective that he has just died, and we see the way that people react to him. And then we go and follow his life, and we learn about the kind of person he was, the kind of job he had, the kind of relationships he had, the kind of, we might say in modern language, the kind of rut that he fell into, the kind of unfortunate habits that he may have formed in life. And then something happens and death begins to approach, and he is then forced to deal with the medical establishment, and the medical establishment treats him in a very cold, clinical way. And he, before this, was in the legal profession, and he had himself treated people in this kind of cold and clinical way. And he's then forced to reflect on the relationships that he has with his family. And then there's a helper, a man who's hired to come and take care of him, and this man shows him a kind of kindness and compassion that was lacking, that he didn't get from the medical establishment. And these two things are juxtaposed against one another. And then he's approaching death, and it's written with real kind of psychological intensity. Is he going to be able to kind of find peace and accept death? And it's quite a moving and a really good story, so I hope you enjoy it. The second one is Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. Now, this is one of the strangest stories that you may ever read. Franz Kafka was writing at the sort of turn of the 1900s, so 1920s, 1930s. He was writing. He lived in Prague, the famous old city, and he was a Jewish man who lived in Prague, and so he experienced some kind of prejudice and low-scale isolation. So he was forced to live in like Jewish ghettos and so on. But he was nevertheless a member of the middle class. He also had a very tyrannical father, whom he writes about in a document that became a short novella called "Letter to My Father." And in this letter to his father, he writes out about the fear that he felt living under his father's tyrannical regime. And there are some extracts from that I've included in the PowerPoint that is alongside this lecture. Anyway, those two things I mentioned, they're important because they give us a sense of why was Kafka the way that he was. Why did he write these very strange stories that have to do with human beings that are disembodied and powerless and kind of outside of themselves and often at the mercy of forces that they cannot control in the most extreme way possible. So he takes it to a level of absurdity and nightmarishness. And in this story, The Metamorphosis, I won't be giving away much except the first line, because you find this out right at the beginning. But Gregor Samsa, the main character in the story, wakes up from a dream to discover that he has become a bug, a huge, large, cockroach-like bug. And the story then progresses from there. And he writes about it with real kind of detail and clarity, and describes it in such a way as if you could really believe that this was happening. He has to try and figure out how to use his legs again now that he has little bug legs, and but it's about the relationship that he has with his sister, the relationship that he has with his parents, the relationship that he has with the employer, and how the world kind of adapts to this new reality that he has become a bug. He's now powerless. He can't go to work and help his family anymore. His sense of self obviously just completely breaks down. And then what happens around him. So pay attention to the relationships that exist, particularly between him and the sister. That's very important, but also him and the parents, and also his place as a worker who's supporting his family, and then what happens when he can't do that anymore. And also bear in mind some of that background stuff that I told you about, where he was living, and his Jewishness in Prague at that time. Most people enjoy the story. It's pretty funny and very dark as well. So I hope you do enjoy it, and see you next time.